Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Frances Shefter, Principal of Shefter Law. She streams the show live on Facebook on the last Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern. Get more details and catch prior episodes at www.shefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Frances Shefter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show. I am so excited about our guest today. I've known Cami for several years, and she does a special type of therapy that I don't know much about. So I'm excited to learn more and to teach you all more about it. So Cami, please introduce yourself.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, my name is Cami, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And also a registered yoga teacher and a certified EMDR therapist. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about EMDR therapy.
Right. So what is EMDR therapy? What does it stand for? What does it do?
Yes. Yeah. Great. There's so much to say about EMDR therapy. I love it. I've been doing EMDR therapy for several years. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Okay, so what it means is what we're going to look for is we're looking for bilateral stimulation, okay, which is the left and the right brain, the hemispheres of the brain, the left hemisphere, right hemisphere. All right, and the goal is what's called hemispheric integration, right? Having the left brain and the right brain work together in an integrated fashion, right? Oftentimes when we're in a state of stress or we've experienced any trauma or just in a time in our life or a place in our life where we're just really stuck, we often will function in just one of the hemispheres of the brain, right? So the bilateral stimulation allows for integration for the two hemispheres to work together. Okay, which is what a healthy brain, what we really want to be able to do. So we can just access the full intended use of our brain and all of the wonderful functions of our brain. Now, bilateral stimulation, also called BLS for short, is any kind of movement or motion that allows for left, right in a rhythmic pattern. Right. So whenever EMDR was being researched, it's a very heavily researched, evidence-based therapy that's been around for many decades. And started with eye movements, right? So following either some technology that was going back and forth, or just your therapist's fingers that are moving back and forth in front of you. Your eyes would move back and forth. That's where it first started in terms of research. But then it has evolved greatly and adapted to many different types of settings and different preferences that people might have. Some people like to close their eyes in therapy, so you can keep your eyes closed and still experience BLS. And how we do that is we could do either hold on onto buzzers and have a buzzing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We could do self-taps where you're tapping on yourself. Or if you want, your therapist could tap on your knees maybe, or you could tap your feet back and forth. There are some natural forms of bilateral stimulation that we all do in our day-to-day, like walking, right? Like meditative walking, right? We're in that left, right rhythmic pattern, right? So many people
I remember that. So when I was a runner, that was like I used to say I would hit that zone, and that's probably what it was because it's just
that's what it was.
Zen.
That's what it was, exactly. That's what it was. And so that back and forth, what it does, especially if you're running and you're moving fast, right? Or you're doing a walking meditation, which is a very, very, ancient practice, right? It's an ancient practice to do walking meditation, walking mindfulness practices. what you're doing there is you're allowing the hemispheres of your brain to integrate. And so what happens there is people feel like more relaxed, like you said, like more zen, or they might think about something a little bit differently. Different insights come to people, when they're in that state. The other thing that there's some other natural forms of bilateral stimulation is swimming is another one, and drumming. Back and forth, drumming can be a type of bilateral stimulation, and many different types of dance and different types of movement, yoga, things like this. These can all induce that same bilateral stimulation.
So it's therapy though. So it's bilateral stimulation. And what I'm hearing, like from my running days, and what I'm hearing is when you're doing it, it hits your zen. So
Yep.
how does this work?
Yep.
Like, can it treat people in the long term?
Yeah. So what we do then is we start off with the eye movements, right? The EMDR is the EM is the eye movement, right? So it could be eye movements, it could be other forms of bilateral stimulation. Okay. But then the way that it becomes therapeutic is that it's we then focus on the DR, right? So the desensitization and the reprocessing. Okay, so desensitization, meaning on a scale of 0 to 10, how reactive are you to this experience, right? So oftentimes in therapy, people will come into therapy or call a therapist for a specific reason, right? And it could be some problem solving. It could be just working on some coping skills. It could be a family stressor or things like that. It could be the case of your work. It could be that your child is struggling or that you are struggling, which is navigating parenting or navigating the education system or advocating for your child's needs. Whatever it might be, you call a therapist typically with some presenting problem, right? So at that point, we're going to be looking at what is this that you want to work on, right? And what does this mean to you? We'll do a lot of like history taking in the beginning. We'll be looking at, tell me more about you as the parent. Tell me about your history, right? What does this mean to you? You have a child that might have unmet learning needs or unmet needs, or just something is going on at home. And what does this mean to you? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your experience, your own, childhood, your own belief system, things like that. And then I'll be doing some digging around and kind of thinking about kind of what are we going to target here, right? And looking at that. So in terms of the desensitization, we're going to be looking at how reactive are you? Like, what does this mean to you? How stressful is this to you, right? So scale of 0 to 10, let's say like my child, navigating, having a learning difference, or a behavior issue, or some sort of unmet need or a health condition, that's really stressful. Absolutely, right? So scale of 0 to 10, I'm at a 9 on a regular basis, right? And I can't fall asleep at night. I can't get along with my partner. I scream at my child more than I would like to, things like that. I can't stop thinking about this, so on and so forth, right? We'll be looking at that. So that's your reactivity, right? Okay. That's that part of the brain that is telling you there's a problem, there's a threat, there's a problem, this is not good, right?
So that when you go into the like flight or fright?
Yes, exactly.
Fight or flight.
The fight mode, right? I got to fight, protect my child, right? Flight, I just got to get away from this. I don't want to deal with this, right? Freeze, I'm just stuck. I just do not know what to do with myself, right? Or with this child, right? There's also other ones called fawn is another one. Fawn is like, people pleasing and let me put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. That's a coping mechanism, right? For stress, right? Let me just make sure everyone else is okay, then I'll be okay, right? Other ones like denial, avoidance, and another one called dissociation, where you just don't feel like you're physically present in your body.
Got it. So is it kind of like, because I know a little bit about tapping, is it kind of like tapping that when you do the EMDR, you're focused on that one trigger?
Yep. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll go through, there's 8 phases in EMDRs, like standard protocol EMDR. There's going to be 8 phases. So we start off with just getting a really, really good history. And then you start focusing on targets. What do you want to target? Right? I get it that there's all these stressors, right? Oftentimes when you come to therapy, you have a laundry list of different things, that are hard for you. And are bothering you, but let's really kind of narrow it down. Okay, narrow it down to a target. And what I'm looking for there is a belief system, right? A belief. What do I believe here? What is my cognition, right? And oftentimes it will be what I call a maladaptive cognition. Sometimes we use the word negative. It doesn't mean that it's actually negative. It could mean that it's just not helping you anymore. It could be
Right.
that it was a very important belief and cognition for you to hold on to in your growing up years. If you were in a survival mode, a fight or flight mode in your own life experience, um, and but what we're looking at there is the cognition. What do I believe to be true? Right. So let's say it's someone that, one of your clients that might be, navigating an IEP and, taking care of their child who might have special needs or health condition, right? What do I believe to be true right now? What is the cognition that I hold on to? Okay. And in that, what we're looking at when we talk about an EMDR, we often talk about memories, right? In the memory network, there are cognitions, right? That's part of our memory network. There's also going to be emotion in that. There's going to be sensation, like physical sensation. When I go to this place, okay, there, my heart starts racing, or becomes harder to breathe, or I can't fall asleep at night, right? Or so on and so forth. They're just different sensations, or I feel a lot of tension, muscle tension in my body. Right. So we're going to look a little bit at the sensations and what happens in the body. We're also going to be looking at, are there any images here? What comes up whenever you go into this cognition, right? What comes up in terms of the imagery, right? And so for a standard, EMDR session, we'll be looking at that. We'll look at the cognition, we'll look at the sensation, the emotion, and the imagery that comes up. And then I'll ask you, while doing the BLS, right? While doing either the eye movements, which can be done virtually now, by the way, with technology has helped us in the pandemic.
The one plus
Yeah.
of the pandemic is we all learned how to go virtual.
Yeah, exactly. And it became more accessible, really, to people
Yep.
who otherwise weren't able to access therapy. They were able to have a session during their lunch break where they otherwise wouldn't have been able to, go in for a session. So we'll be doing the virtual, eye movements, and then I'll be asking you to hold on to that cognition, right? You're watching it like it's a movie, the cognition and that imagery, and noticing any emotion and sensation. So what I'll do then is I'll stop every 15 to 20 seconds. We'll be stopping, taking an inhale and an exhale, and just kind of noticing what's coming up. So oftentimes what comes up is people first start off by getting people first start off saying, this is really weird. This is really strange, and I don't understand what's going on. But then we start going into the body, and then the body starts to release a little bit, starts to relax a little bit. Right. Some people, depending on their trauma and depending on, their own experiences with anxiety and their body, they might start to feel like a lot of sensation, or they might start to feel a lot of emotion, or just crying. A lot of people just feel really sleepy. The eye movements, which are similar to the eye movements whenever we're in the REM cycle of our sleep, right, where we're processing. Right. So they might begin to just feel sleepy and yawn, and that's all good stuff. That's all good stuff. It means the brain is doing what it's supposed to do. Right. The severe EMDR is a really natural form of the brain healing. Right. There are natural forms of healing, and EMDR is natural. Right. There's no we're not doing anything that your brain doesn't already do when it's sleeping.
Got it. So I'm going to take this a little different direction, because I don't know if you know that I'm a foster parent.
No.
So yeah, we're a foster family now, and I do a lot of work in DC foster system.
Oh,
We're
okay.
foster
Great.
parents in Maryland.
Great.
And
Yeah.
when you say trauma,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
these foster kids are what jump
Yeah.
into my mind. And
Mhm,
so,
mhm.
the couple of questions are, how old, and does
Yeah.
the child actually have to remember
Yeah, that's a
what
great
happened?
yeah, that's a great question. So how young can a child be? When I was trained in EMDR, the person that trained me did bilateral stimulation on as young as 3 years old.
Wow.
Okay. And it's going to, of course, look very different. The great thing about EMDR is that it can be really adapted to different age groups and to different needs. And it can also be adapted to different, in different cultural backgrounds, to people who maybe, who might have had difficulty accessing talk therapy. Right? Talk therapy is very different and it uses a different part of the brain, right? It uses more of those cognitions. So EMDR can be used with children as very young. You want a very specially trained EMDR therapist, though, that feels comfortable working with children and who has experience. Anna Gomez is the trainer in using EMDR with children. And in terms of, do they have to remember? No, they really don't. And they don't have to talk about it at all. And even I see that even to adults that I work with, that some adults, they're very hesitant. People are very hesitant to come into therapy. I don't want to go there. I don't want to open this up. I don't want to talk about every life experience I've ever had. And I say, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to talk about this. You actually don't really have to tell me. A lot of people like to, but you don't have to tell me that many details, about what you're processing. Okay. So with a child, yeah, you can do some tapping, right? With the therapist, have the therapist that they're working with, do some bilateral tapping. Some things that can be helpful is just doing some, just on their feet, right? Just tapping back and forth on their feet, on each foot, and doing some drawing, some coloring, and some, art therapy, play therapy, right? And allowing for the traumas, right? All the emotion and the bodily sensation, right? Allowing that to clear. So with trauma, we always say, the body remembers, right? So it doesn't have to be that the child is able to like cognitively, share, verbatim, word for word what they're going through. It could be that their body's holding the tension.
Right.
Right. And then of course comes in kind of how is that, without therapy or without any intervention, like what then is happening to that body, right? If we're holding so much of that trauma, what then is happening to that body? And let's say like to the, just the sensations and the tension that they're holding and the nervous system function, right? So we want to give kids like that an outlet to release that trauma.
And you said there were 8 phases. So,
Yeah.
is that 8 sessions or is that, more sessions?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are 8 phases, right? So there's 8 stages that as a therapist I take a person through in order to consider it like complete. Some of those phases could go longer than others. Some of them can be very short. It really depends on the person. Now, everybody likes to ask, how many sessions do I really have to be in therapy for? I don't really want to be in therapy for that long. And I that's a very frequent question. And I totally understand. It's hard work. According to research, I'll say this, according to research, and again, EMDR is very heavily researched, 3 to 4 sessions, oftentimes people feel some relief.
Oh, wow.
After 3 to 4 sessions, people feel some relief. Some people like to continue past that, right? It really does depend, because oftentimes what happens is people are not coming into therapy necessarily with a single trauma, right? There's often multiple traumas and perhaps even like more complex or developmental, trauma. So with that, that's okay. That's not to discourage people. But what that means is that we want to be really clear about what we're targeting here. Okay. It may not be, going back to like your podcast listeners, it may not be that it's the IEP, sitting in that room with, the teachers and the administrators talking
People.
and talking about your child. It could not be that maybe that's what the real root is, right? We want to look at the root, right? What is the real root here? Okay, well, could it be that there's something from your childhood, your early childhood, right? Sitting in this room with, as much as 10 different teachers and administrators, I feel like I can't even breathe sometimes. I feel like I can't contain my tears. I'm so scared for my child. Okay, well, what is the cognition there? And let's go back. Let's go back. When was the
That
first time you remember feeling that way? When was the
um,
worst time you felt that way?
right. It's so funny that you say that because it brought me back to my teaching days. And I remember my first couple of years teaching when the principal would call me to her office. I would freak out, And I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a teacher, I'm an adult, and I knew she wasn't gonna, yell at me or anything, but it was just that memory as a
Yeah.
child,
Yeah.
getting called to the principal office was really bad.
Yeah, exactly. So in an EMDR session, you could work through that, right? Kind of like, what does that feel like in the body? Like you get that call that you're have to go down to the principal's office. What does that feel like in the body? What are the emotions, and what is that cognition? What does this sounds like? Oh my goodness, did I do something wrong? Am I bad? Right? Did I make a mistake? What so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. So you were saying like 3 to 4 sessions, which I know, I get it, it
Yeah.
depends because
Could
you
be
wanna go
more.
deeper or
Yeah.
not. And
Yeah.
would you say that is like per issue? So you would have to do each individual issue that you're having?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Ideally, what we want to do, what the therapist needs to really be able to do, is to hone in on what is the root of all of these different issues together, right? So you could come into therapy with like 10 different issues, right? 10 different traumas, all these these awful things have happened, right? And all these major stressors in your life. And ideally, what we want to look at and start to look at is what is the root cognition there.
Oh,
And
that makes sense.
oftentimes, just to give you an example, oftentimes, um, some of the cognitions that are really common are things like I'm just not safe, or I'm just worthless, right? I'm just
Right.
worthless, or I'm a failure, or I'm not going to survive, right? So we want to look at that. So that could have come up many different times in your life, and the imagery is going to be there, the memory is going to be there, yes. But notice that the umbrella, right, that root cause is all the same cognition.
That makes sense. And so as the therapist, you help
Mm.
narrow everything down to figure out what
Yeah,
that
yeah, we
cognition
wanna
is.
narrow it down. We wanna narrow
That's
it down, and that will help, help you. So through the protocol, what happens then is that desensitization, right? We wanna bring that reactivity down. So I'm very sensitive, let's say, to this cognition, right? So scale of 0 to 10, I go up to a 9 every time something happens, right? Every time I think about this, every time my child comes home from school or something like that, right? I go up
right.
to a 9. Okay. So what we want to do in this protocol is we're bringing that number down. Right, we're bringing that number down. So our emotions, our sensations, we're not so reactive, right? And then what we want to do when we do start to bring it down, okay, is then we want to look at, well, what would be more helpful to you? If that's a maladaptive cognition, what would be more adaptive? What would help you now in your parenting journey, right?
Right.
In your parenting journey, now you're working with your child and helping them have their needs met, right? What would be more adaptive? What would be more helpful to you, right? So then we want to look at kind of going back and installing that, right? So
And
that's where
breaking the
some of
cycle,
we
right?
want
Breaking
to
the cycle.
exactly, right? Like, and
Yeah.
reprocessing, okay? And then we'll do in the protocol, we'll also look at kind of future templates. So it could be that, I have an IEP meeting coming up. And so we might do some sessions on like kind of what would you like that meeting, to look like? Like, what do you need in your body, in your emotions, in your sensations, right? In your cognitions, what do you need there? Right. Well, I want to believe that I am a really good mother. I want to believe I'm a really good parent. Um, I want to believe that I have the support that I need. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, wow. And it's, the first thing that comes to mind with that as a parent sitting at an IEP table and stuff is that it's so stressful and it's so emotional. And,
Mhm.
um, I we joke around in a parent group, people were saying, why is my daughter's IEP meeting so stressful? And I always say, look, I do this for a living. I, help families get through it. That's Stress-Free IEP. But my own daughter's IEP meeting, it's
Mhm.
stressful for me too, because
Yes,
as the parent, that's where you
it's your
are.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. It's personal, right? It feels
Yeah.
really personal. Yeah.
So when you go into, we keep saying cognition,
Yeah.
is there like a list of cognitions, or can you go a little deeper into that
Yeah, sure.
definition?
Cognition is a belief, right? It's a belief, right? So we have automatic thoughts, right? That's I don't know if you're familiar with like cognitive behavioral therapy. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, they call it automatic thoughts, right?
Okay.
But when we have these thoughts, they oftentimes have a theme, right? And
Right.
that's where we want to pay attention to. So as a therapist, I listen for that, right? I'm listening for what are these thoughts? What does this theme seem to be here, right? So we want to go a little deeper. I'm sorry, we'll go a little deeper into that of looking at the cognitions, the beliefs. What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about let's say like my family? What do I believe about my community? What do I believe about the world? Right. So that's part of like our perspective, right? Our worldview, our view of ourself, right? And oftentimes in childhood, 0 to 10 years old or so is when children are developing those beliefs, right? Developing those cognitions about myself, about my
Yeah.
family, about the collective, about the world around me.
So the first thing that came to mind on that is children that were brought up in the Depression era.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
they thought there's no money, you're going to lose
Yes.
everything. And
Yes.
so that, like,
Yes.
I have to save as much as possible so that,
Yes. Yes.
interesting.
Absolutely, right? And so again, like what were they exposed to like the 0 to 10 years, right? If that's what they
Right.
were exposed to, yeah, that was part of their survival mechanism. And
Yep.
that was adaptive for them at that time. That helped people survive, right? At
Right.
that time. What happens though, right, fast forward, is it maladaptive? And how we know that is it creating more stress, right? Is it
Got it.
creating more stress? Or another word is like, is it creating symptoms, right?
Right.
Symptoms, right? Like an example, like insomnia. Is it creating insomnia? That's a symptom. And then that has then become maladaptive, right?
Right. Interesting. That's so it's adaptive at that
At
time
that time,
becomes
yes, exactly.
interesting.
And I tell
Right.
it to my clients all the time that, this served a really important purpose. It helped you survive, right?
Right.
It did what it was supposed to do, right? This cognition kept you safe, right? Kept you in that ability to cope and survive whatever those circumstances might have been, right? But at this time, is it helping you or is it creating more symptoms? Is it making you,
Interesting.
feel unwell?
Right. So for parents, like now to look back at my audience, I want to give them a little something. So, I mean, I think this is great, and I hope people will call you. But like, do you have some like simple ways to reduce stress in the
Mhm.
home? Because I mean, as you know, a parent of young children, it's difficult to begin with.
Yeah.
Then add on neurodivergent children, and it's just overwhelm. And so, what can parents do to help bring themselves down when they feel that heightened
Mhm.
sensation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, simple things, right? Just at home. Um, Start looking a little bit at some of those cognitions, right? Thinking about kind of what are some of the patterns of my own thinking? What are some of the patterns of what do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my children? What do I believe about our family, about our community, right? About the world around me. Start looking at those. It could even be a simple exercise of like writing it down in a journal, right? And then thinking about how can is there something that I want to work on, something that I really want to target? Okay. Also looking at our kids, right?
Yeah,
What do I believe about my kid, right? What do I believe about
right,
my child? How do I notice their strengths, right? How do I listen and pay attention to their needs? Right?
right,
How do I notice whenever their needs might becoming overwhelming to me? And what might that mean that I need then? Right? So some
Right.
other ways are being able to just get comfortable with, being comfortable with making some slight changes and being flexible, like in our thinking. Um, Being able to reframe and really look for those strengths, right? Like that child who, doesn't sit still in their class. And if you're getting notes home every day about that, okay, the strength there is, wow, that child must be super athletic, right? Or
Right.
whatever. I have kids too, so I know. Right. Or that child who, has something to say about everything, right? Okay, so that's awesome. You have some great opinions, and I really want to hear about those, right? I will really want to
Right.
hear about those. Right now is not the time, but I want to hear about those opinions. Those looking for strengths in the child.
Right.
That's such a gift you can give to yourself and to the child, right? Many children with neurodivergence, it's a really tough system to be a neurodivergent child. It's tough. It's tough out there, right? When we kind of there's a lot of struggles to get kind of standard learning accomplished, but there are tons of strengths of being a
Right.
neurodivergent child and adult in this world. And focus on those. Look for those strengths, right? And if you're struggling with that, ask for some feedback, right? Ask for some feedback to look for those strengths. Um, and look for things that let's see, things that your child can participate in, right? It may not be the standard thing, and it may not be what you believed your parenting journey was going to look like, right?
Right.
Right.
And it's, like on IEPs, it's always, I don't want to say they're negative, but they're focused. There's present levels that's supposed to say where your child is, but then it goes into the weaknesses, which is
Mhm.
where we get the goals. So they can be so, focused on
Yeah.
the weaknesses, which
Mhm.
I get and I understand because we want to bring the weaknesses up.
Yeah.
But I always say, find the child's
Yeah.
strength
Yeah.
and bring the weaknesses up using that strength.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that child who can't sit still in the class is fine. That's great. Okay, go for a walk. Let's go for a walk. Let's do something physical. Let's get one of those bouncy balls and bounce, right? Look for their strengths. When you're at home, same thing, right? How many times can you run up and down the stairs? Okay, great. That's awesome, right? If they're able to do some sports or some activities, even just something in the backyard or something in your home, um, just again, focus on their strengths. And what does that then mean about them? Right? Right?
Right.
What does that mean about them? All right. So I have a very athletic, older child. And what does that mean then about you? Okay, fine. Yeah, you can play this game, right? But what does that mean about you that you can stay in the game? You're a good team player, right? You have good communication skills. You can talk to those friends, support them. Um, you have persistence, you practice, you show up for practice every day, right? You have persistence. That's persistence, right? What else is it about you that you can? And so we want to foster in children like that healthy, those healthy cognitions, right?
Right.
I can do hard things. It is okay when I don't have control over everything. I can find things that I can control, right?
And I mean, I would say it's also not minimizing the strength
Mm-hmm.
because I know a lot of people will be like, when somebody would compliment, like, wow, that was a great throw. You've got a great arm,
Mm-hmm.
and the kid will say, oh, it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's, that's like minimizing it and realizing, look, you can throw, but the next 20 people don't
Mm-hmm.
have an arm like you.
Yeah, yeah. And you're a leader then, right?
Yep.
That's
Exactly.
that's wonderful. That's a great thing,
Yeah.
right? And then I have a younger one who is just super imaginative, right? So again, looking
Mhm.
at the what does that mean then about you, right? Okay, that
Right.
you're curious, that you're bright, right? That you think differently. And that's awesome. You see the world differently. You have a different perspective. And that's beautiful, right?
Right.
And so really look for those strengths. And then same thing with yourself as the parent, right? What does that mean about you? Right? That you're working with an attorney, you're going to these IEP meetings. What does this mean about you? Right? That you are dedicated, right? That you are a loyal and good enough parent,
Right.
right? And
And
not perfect, because that doesn't exist, right? But good enough. Good enough.
Right. And that, it's so interesting because a lot of times, like, our society takes asking for help as a weakness. And in
Mhm.
actuality, it's a strength.
It's
It's
such a strength.
knowing,
It is such
like, I
a
can't do this,
yeah.
so I'm going to hire somebody to
Yep.
help me do that.
Absolutely.
It's a
Asking for help,
no.
it is a strength, absolutely. The another strength is really learning how to say no, right? Again, in our
Mhm.
society,
Yep.
right? In our society, we very much want people to, don't say no, keep piling on, piling on. Actually, it's a strength. Say no. Learn how to say no, and just like they say, no is a complete sentence. You don't
I
have to
was just going to say
you
that.
don't have to over explain, right? All that stuff, that over explaining and that, that stress, that's a stress response, right? Again, that fawn, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? I
Or
have
the
to do
guilt, the
yes,
guilt response of saying
exactly.
no, being
Yes,
brought up of
this
like, you
is
don't say
too
no.
stressful.
And
Do
yeah.
too, that becomes a stressor of, does it mean something, again, that cognition, does it mean something negative about me, right? If I'm saying no to things, right? And so, as a therapist, I would be looking at, well, why aren't you saying no to more to more obligations, or saying no, maybe saying no to the children, or saying no to activities, or certain work obligations, right? What is the cognition there?
Got it. That's so interesting because, yeah, I mean, I remember back, if you want to get something done, if you want somebody to do something, ask a busy person because you can tell they don't know how to say no and they're going to do it and they're going to get it done.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. So learning how to say no and letting that just be the complete sentence, right? Asking for help, looking at those strengths, reframing, doing some journaling, and then just doing some other types of just, breathing exercises, just things, just you don't have to sit down for a formal practice, but just if you're not able to, but just something like if you're cooking dinner, right? Just noticing, kind of being more mindful. Okay. Turning off the cell phone. Imagine that, right? Just turning it off, like powering off,
Right.
right? Powering down
I
for
go
like
into anxiety with that.
yeah, yeah. Powering down for an hour, 2 hours in the evening, right?
Right.
Just being unavailable or do not disturb, right? Um, Noticing, if you're washing the dishes, just notice the temperature of the water, the smell, the any taste in your mouth, what colors do you see if you're looking out the window, right? Notice any of the sounds, things like that. um just giving your brain that break,
To just be present and just to
to
be there.
just be present and to breathe and to come back into the body.
Ah, that is like just so amazing because I'm thinking about, oh, when I'm doing dishes, I'm usually listening to podcasts, thinking about all the things I need to do next instead of just being.
Just being and just washing the dishes, just feeling the temperature of the water, on your hands. And
Yeah.
that's it. Same thing if you're cooking something, just smelling the flavors, right? And just
Right.
smelling it. And then that's it, right? And then later listening to your podcast, or later, doing the to-do list, right?
Right.
But being able to give your brain and body that small break.
Yeah. That is so wonderful. Ah, I could talk to you all day about this. It's so amazing. So how can people get in touch with you? Like if people want to learn more about EMDR or want to make an appointment with you, how can people do that?
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, I have a website, so I can share the website with you, and so people can reach out to me. And I'm also really a big advocate of just finding the right match. So even if I'm not the right match for someone, I have a really big network of other therapists,
Right.
and so I love finding good matches for people, and I can send you other names and help you just find. And if it's not EMDR you're looking for, if you're looking for talk therapy or another type of brain-based or body-based therapy, those are great. There are a lot of therapists in this area, and there's a lot of help available for people who are ready and able to access that help.
I love that you say find the right match
Yeah,
because I know, like, for me, it's why did they choose that person over me? And it's like, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just the other person was a
yeah,
better match.
Exactly.
and it's,
Exactly. Find that right match. It's going to be so helpful to the client, to have that good match, to, again, like looking at that, can I trust that person? Do I feel safe with that person? Do I feel heard by that person?
Right. That is so wonderful. This is so amazing. We are going to put your link, your contact information will be in the show notes. If you're listening to this on a podcast, if you enjoyed listening to Cami and want to know when we have more shows, make sure you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Subscribe to any of those channels so that you get notified when we have more videos and more live. And also, if you know of somebody that you think would be a great guest on my show, I'm always looking to meet new people. And please go ahead, put it in a comment, shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you.
You've been listening to Stress-Free IEP with your host, Francis Shefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Francis through shefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.